Welcome to Rights for Women, a podcast all about celebrating women's voices and supporting women writers. I'm Pamela Cook, women's fiction author, writing teacher, mentor and podcaster. Before beginning today's chat, I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the Dharawal people, the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast is being recorded, along with the traditional owners of the land throughout Australia. And a quick reminder that there could be strong language and adult concepts discussed in this podcast, so please be aware of this if you have children around. Let's relax on the convo couch and chat to this week's guest.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Rights for Women. This week's episode is a really important episode for all authors, all creative, and in fact for all readers. So that is a big chunk of the listenership. It's a chat with Tracey Spicer and top-selling Australian author Sandie Docker about the impact of AI and some of the things that are happening that are impacting authors, impacting the publishing industry, and ultimately impacting readers. So it was fantastic to get Tracy and Sandie onto the podcast to talk about this from their perspectives. Let me tell you a little bit about the lead into how this episode came about. So the increasing use of AI is causing a huge concern for the publishing industry. And many of you will be aware that Meta has been reported to be using author works from pirated sites to train their AI systems. Pirate book sites have been around for a long time. And I know when my first book came out, I immediately became aware of this and that there were pirated copies out there pretty much the day that it came out. When I spoke to my publisher about this, she said it's like whack-a-mole. We get rid of one and more pop up. So it's been one of those throw your hands up in the air type thing. That said, there would be a very small segment of the reading community using those pirated sites, thankfully, but they do exist. So Meta apparently has been using those pirated sites, so therefore using the information without the permission of either the author or the publisher. Neither of them are getting paid for Meta using that information to train their bots. And it has led to an uproar from creatives and sparked numerous petitions to government bodies demanding an inquiry into the situation and some kind of protection for creatives, including writers and illustrators, of course. So I was alerted to this situation when Sandie Docker emailed a number of us in her author network and created some educational slides so that readers could understand the situation from the author's perspective, so that readers really were aware of how authors were feeling about this situation. And also via Sandie, I contacted Tracey Spicer. But Tracy has about 18 months ago published a book called Man-Made, and it was all about her deep dive into artificial intelligence and really from a feminist point of view, and how a feminist and humanist point of view in terms of the inherent biases that exist within AI and some of the things that we really aren't aware of in our day-to-day use of AI. So as a bit more background to the current situation around the Meta using pirated material, this came from the Australian Society of Authors website. AI offers new opportunities and efficiencies, but also poses significant risks to the creative industries. It's imperative that the development and use of generative AI is carefully regulated. The rights of human creators must be safeguarded and their contributions to the development of AI technologies acknowledged and compensated. And just adding in here, post-recording this episode, as I edit it, that I have spoken to Lucy Hayward from the Australian Society of Authors, and we're actually going to have a chat in a few weeks' time in light of the recent election in Australia, just to see what the ASA is planning going forward once the dust settles from the election. They're going to know a little bit more about what might happen around this issue in terms of lobbying the government. So watch out for that in a few weeks' time. I'll be chatting to Lucy Hayward from the Australian Society of Authors. Without further ado, let's launch into this conversation with Tracey Spicer, very well-known Australian journalist and feminist, and Sandie Docker, hugely loved Australian author who is spearheading an educational awareness campaign for writers and particularly for readers. It is fantastic to have Sandie Docker and Tracey Spicer here talking about this whole AI issue that we have all come up against as creatives, as writers in particular, the whole use around copyright, everything that's going on with Meta. But there is so much more around the whole AI issue that we need to be aware of. Sandie Docker is a well-known Australian author, and Sandie grabbed this whole issue by the horns and really ran with it. And it was what Sandie was doing around AI and how that was impacting authors that has prompted me to actually do this podcast. So, Sandie, can we start with you with a little bit of background on what did prompt you to take action on the social media front around creating awareness, I think, around the AI issue, and just a little bit, around that for you?
Yeah, sure. I was in the same boat as I think just about everybody. And it was when The Atlantic put out their report that I realised what had happened. And it wasn't for me so much about the fact that the pirate websites existed and our books were on those pirate websites, because we've known forever that those pirate websites are there. And it hasn't really impacted us because it's only a very small amount of people that would look for our work on those sites. Readers, most of them will look for our work in genuine spaces and support us. So that part didn't shock me. It was the fact that certain tech companies had then taken that work and used it for their own measures and will be profiting off that in the future. That was really quite shocking. And The Atlantic also had court documents, because there is a class action happening over in the States. They had court documents with memos from the people at these tech companies saying, we know this is wrong. We know that we shouldn't be doing it, but it's cheaper and quicker, so we're going to do it anyway. And that was just fueling the outrage. And so I was seeing all of my author friends putting up posts about how devastated they were that this was happening, the possible impacts upon our careers. And I was devastated as well, but I wanted to take that devastation and turn it into action. Whether that action turns into anything in the end or not, whether we make a difference, I couldn't just sit by and feel sorry for myself. So I put together some information, primarily coming at it from a reader's perspective. Because as authors, we know what it means to us, but what does it also mean for the reader? Because as a group of people, authors, we're quite a small number of people in Australia. I think there's only 10,000 authors in Australia. But when you include our readers, you include nearly the entire nation. So making it aware for them of what it actually means to them, not just to us, and then trying to get some sort of action going to bring it to the attention of the powers that be that might be able to do something about it. Because I can't take on that tech company. The three of us together can't take on those tech companies, but perhaps government can, or perhaps some of those other agencies can.
That's great, Sandie. Thank you. And we're going to come back to a little bit more on that whole what readers can do and what we can do as authors. But it was really interesting, like when all the stuff broke on social media about in the news about what was happening with Meta and the pirated sites and everything that we're here talking about. I have to admit, I am a little bit of an ostrich and thought, okay, I'm just going to put, this is so big and so potentially devastating. I'm going to put my head in sand about this. So it was really interesting for me to then read what you had done, Sandie, and to see those posts. And it actually then, as I said, it spurred me on to action. So I know that there is hopefully that domino effect that when we see things in a form where we can understand it a little bit better, I think it helps so much. So Tracy, you have done so much research into this whole AI issue with your fabulous book that came out. I think it was last year, wasn't it?
Oh, it was in 2023, actually,
What?
in May. And incredibly, it came out only a couple of months after ChatGPT exploded into the public consciousness. And while a lot has changed since that time, the fundamentals of AI are still the same, particularly the bias built into it, which is what my book focused on.
So Tracy, I know you talk about this in the book, but just for listeners, what was it that prompted you to go down that whole AI rabbit hole and to write the book?
My son, who's now 20, when he was 11, he said, "Mum, I want a robot slave." I said, "Darling, what are you talking about?" Anyway, in a moment of appalling parenting, we'd allowed him to watch the adult cartoon series South Park so we could get an extra half-hour sleep in the morning.
Understandable.
Understandable, thank you. And in one episode, Cartman, a very naughty boy, was ordering around his Amazon Alexa like he was some kind of colonial master. So as a lifelong feminist, journalist and writer, I had an epiphany that this idea about women and girls being servile in the home is being built into the female voice chatbots. Because if you look in the business and finance sector, they predominantly have male voices. So in that deep dive over a period of 7 years, I discovered other biases being embedded in different ways. For example, say if you use something like Canva or Midjourney to create an image, or if you use ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini to write a story, they will lean on the databases. Now, databases, because they're historical, traditionally, every nurse is a female, every doctor is a male. They've got very old-fashioned social mores. They tend to lean on stories about and images of white people in Western countries, in city areas, not rural or regional areas. There are no people with disability unless you insist, make the star of this story a person with disability or show a person with disability. Very heteronormative. It's a very homogenized way of viewing society. So that's the data sets. That's the first step. And in creating AI, the second step is the algorithm. Now, we think of that as a mathematical equation, but a couple of people I interviewed said, you know what? An algorithm is an opinion written in code about how the world should work. And when you think that almost all of the big algorithms are written by young white guys in Silicon Valley, that's a particular way of viewing the world. And the third step for artificial intelligence is machine learning that deepens the biases from the first two steps. So yes, we're talking a lot about breach of copyright here and theft of authors' and artists' work, but one of the other ancillary problems is the kind of future that we're creating, which is incredibly homogenized.
That was a revelation to me, reading that in your book. When I really thought about it, I thought, yeah, Alexa and the Siri, the female voice on our everything that we use when we use Maps or Siri or anything. And yeah, so it was really illuminating to read that and about the other biases, as you say, Tracy, that are built into that. And it's just not something that we think about, is it? When we go about our day-to-day life, because so much of this stuff has become just part and parcel of how we live now, but without us even questioning it.
Yeah, although I have to say, since I've been doing speeches around the book, which has been about a year and a half, almost 2 years now, actually, what I've noticed is a growing usage of AI, of course, and a growing understanding of the biases. For example, I spoke at a librarians conference recently, and I put into ChatGPT, show me an image of a librarian. Now think about that sector. It's about 80 to 90% female. It came up with a bearded guy in glasses as a librarian. So that's how much this idea of the default being male in workplace, regardless of profession, is built into these technologies. And it's the same as stories. I'm always doing these days, if I do occasionally use AI for something, I'm doing what's called machine teaching, the step on from machine learning, which is, hang on, make a woman of color the star of this story. Put a person with disability in here just to, I suppose, insert appropriate diversity into those data sets that'll make up the innovations of the future.
Okay, that's great. So that is something that we can all be doing, is being very aware of what we're feeding into it.
Yeah, exactly. Change starts with education and then comes action. But I am reticent to go too far down this path because effectively big tech has put out deeply flawed, unethical, biased products, and they're expecting us to fix it with our unpaid labor. So that really feeds into the copyright debate as well. So do we even use these things because they're so unethical? If we're forced to use it, should we be doing unpaid work to make it better, or should big tech be fixing it?
Sandie, before this kind of whole thing broke with Elsa's work being used, how conscious were you of the issues around AI, and were you using it, or have you been using it all in your kind of day-to-day work life?
I've been aware of its existence. I think we are all aware of AI's existence. I probably wasn't aware of just how many day-to-day things that we do and use rely on AI. I don't use generative AI. I've never gone into any of those programs and said, write me a paragraph on or tell me about a character who. I've never done anything like that. But spell check is AI, technically. And we do use those. I do use dictation when I'm writing, and that is a form of AI. It learns how I speak when I'm speaking, so it knows what words I'm trying to say. So I have used it in that way. And I am aware of the biases that are inherent in it. It can only be as smart, as Tracy said, as its data that's input into it, and that data is inherently biased. It's also very flawed in that nobody's checking whether the output is correct or not. There's an author friend of mine who got contacted by a reader and said, oh, you're an expert in X field. Can you please help me? I'm writing a paper about it. And the author went, I don't know anything about X field. What are you talking about? Oh, I put it into ChatGPT and they said, you wrote a book about it. And this author said, I've never written a book about it. And the person kept coming back, but you did. ChatGPT told me that you wrote a book. So nobody's checking that side of it either. So I would never use it for research, for example, because I can't trust the information that's coming out. Obviously, that will improve over time. And we can't get rid of AI. It's here and it's going to stay. It's how we use it that's going to be really important moving forward. And we as a society need to start putting pressure on the powers that be to dictate some guidelines about how it can be used and how it should be used moving forward.
You brought up something really interesting there, Sandie, because I've had a couple of people say to me in recent months, oh, there's no way AI could be biased because it's a robot. How can a robot be biased? And that's why when things are spat out by ChatGPT, people just believe it because they believe robots are perfect, humans are fallible, without realizing the technology is deeply fallible. I also wanted to pop a caveat in there by saying that when I do play with generative AI, I don't do it for any of my creative projects. I simply do it to understand the technology and play with it to see where the bias is hidden, because almost everyone is using it these days and using it without the education and without the knowledge and trusting it implicitly.
So, Tracy, what can we do? Obviously, you spent, as you said, 7 years researching the book, and the book came out a couple of years ago now, 18 months ago. Things are changing so much all the time. Obviously, you've still been talking about it and been very active in this area. What key changes have occurred in that time since you finished writing the book that you think we really need to be aware of as well?
Oh, the speed, the scale, and the lowering of the barriers to entry. They're the three things that I would say. Almost anybody can use it. It's so easy to use these days. It's so cheap. And that's why we're seeing so many problems with deep fakes and voice cloning. There are huge privacy issues because anything that we've put on the internet, or even we're being hacked as well, because AI can really help hackers and bad actors. But so much of who we are, our bodies, our words, our opinions, our videos, our images are now being stolen and scraped on a daily basis and used for companies that then make money out of them. So that is I would say that is absolutely the biggest change that I've seen in the last 2 years.
Yeah, it's pretty frightening, isn't it? That anything that we put out, there's just no protection around it.
That's right. And even things that we don't put out. Like our books being scraped, they're supposed to be protected under copyright laws. And that's why I think when you align it with the conversation around deepfake and voice cloning, deepfake, which is predominantly used for pornography, deepfakes and voice cloning are being used to erode democracy when it comes to political campaigns. That's why when something like your book is scraped, that it does feel visceral, it feels emotional, and it feels like a violation. You think this is something that I created, this is mine that I've put out there for readers, and readers value it, and you have beautiful emotional conversations with readers. There's a connection there. And for a website, to scrape it and to pirate it, and then for big tech to say that your book, your words are worth nothing, it's of no value, it really feels like a violation.
It clearly does have value. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing it. And that's the irony of it. If our words had no value to these people, they wouldn't need them.
Exactly. Sandie, in your kind of space where you've been doing some lobbying and doing some social media education, I know you've spoken to a lot of authors around this. What's the vibe out there at the moment in terms of how people are feeling about what we can do about it?
Yeah, it's quite disheartening because it is such a big problem and it is a global problem. So what can we do is the prevailing issue with it. And I think that's why nobody else was addressing it the way I tried to address it. And not that I have the answers at all, because it is such a huge issue. And how do we tackle it? But it's one of those things where if we stand together, then we can make a bigger difference. And not just authors, not just musicians, not just artists, but we all need to stand together because this isn't just about creativity. This leaks into every aspect of society. And we do have some advocacy bodies. We have the ASA, who advocates for authors in Australia. They are going to be working with other advocacy bodies from other industries and work together. But yeah, authors on an individual basis are feeling really disheartened about it. It takes us years to write. And I always say to my readers, it's our heart and soul on a page. Whether it's good or bad or in between, whether you love the story or hate it, it's our heart and soul that goes into this. And for me, it's not about whether I'm going to lose my job as an author. It's the fact that it's my heart and soul. And it comes back to what Tracy said. It becomes very personal and very visceral. They've stolen my heart and my soul. And it's hard for authors to grapple with that, I think.
Tracy, what we were saying about the proliferation of this and how it has gotten out of control with apparently no checks going on. But what have you seen coming out of some of these conversations around what kind of regulations could potentially be put in place?
This is where I'm genuinely quite optimistic. I'm always a glass half full kind of gal. So hopefully it's not misplaced optimism. I'm reminded of what happened with Napster when that file sharing platform came out in the music industry and bands and producers came together and they stopped it. Napster died. So there are a few examples like that within different industries throughout history that could be a template. There are 16 lawsuits at least happening at the moment. I can't imagine that all of them, the creatives, are going to lose. There will be some that get across the line. I also like to look at the lessons of history. We are right in the middle of the fourth industrial revolution, right? In every other revolution, if you even think about the advent of the automobile, for a long time, the car was driven without seatbelts. We're in that grey area between the car being built and safety belts being put on to people. Technology always moves ahead of regulation and legislation. On the AI bias piece, I'm incredibly heartened by the EU's AI Act. It provides an incredible template for jurisdictions right around the world. Canada has had a second reading of its ADA Act, which not only looks at safe, responsible, and what they call sober use of AI, but it's also looking at the bias piece to legislate that intersection between AI and equity to make sure there's no widening of the gap between rich and poor, that the technology doesn't more deeply embed the bias in society between, say, the global north and the global south. Australia has its 10-principle voluntary AI safety program, which will become mandatory in some form this year. So we are getting there with regulation and legislation, and all we need to do as creatives, authors, artists, is to keep it in the public consciousness, to keep it in front of government, to say this should be a priority.
And knowledge is power in that respect. That's part of the human condition. Knowledge is power. And so the more aware that the public are about not only how it affects us and our industry, but how it's then going to go on and affect them. And in every industry that they go to, you look at bias in the medical field, for example. As women, we know we've been fighting that for centuries. It's the same sort of thing. And so the more the public become aware of it, the more it can help fuel those changes and those legislations that are needed in this area.
So, Sandie, you actually have created some social media slides and some information for readers so that they can actually weigh in on this as well. Because as you said earlier, it is something that's obviously going to affect readers if they're not getting books that are genuinely written by the author they think they're getting. And then also the problem that those authors could just decide, no, I'm not going to be doing this anymore. It falls too hard. So what are some of the things that readers can actually do to help in this situation?
Yeah, I think it's really important for readers to understand that we're telling their stories. It's our experiences that are their experiences that we put on the page. And if they don't want those stories to disappear, their experiences to disappear, there are some really simple things that I think that they can do. And I'm sure there are other things as well that greater minds than mine can come up with. But the things that came to me immediately when I was thinking about this issue was, firstly, go to author talks. You know, there are a lot around, and authors do tour when they have books out and in the off season as well. And it's a really wonderful way to connect with the authors and to connect with the work. And not only do you then know for sure that there is a person behind the book that you've read, but it also sends a really clear message to the publishers, to the tech companies, that as a reader, you want to see books written by people, not by computers.
Yeah.
So that's something that's really easy to do. It's an hour of your time every now and then. And
it's fun.
Sorry?
It's
fun. And most author talks are free. So it's not going to cost you anything as a reader to do it. The other thing you can do is, until they make some sort of legislation identifying books that are written by AI or not, is when you're buying books or borrowing books from the library, make sure you're only buying or borrowing those books that you know are written by humans. And in those slides, which I won't go into now, I have written some tips on how you can tell whether the person behind the book is actually real or if it's AI generated. Another idea I had, which might be a little bit more difficult for some readers, is to think twice before you use AI in your own work. ChatGPT is one of the most common ones, and it's easy for you to use that to quickly craft an email or a speech for a wedding or whatever it might be, but you're feeding into this behemoth of a problem if you do that. And your speech or your email doesn't have to be perfect.
Yeah.
It just has to be you. And AI can't replicate that. Writing to your MP, and I have some sample templates on my website. And again, I'm an amateur at this. These were just some ideas to try to make it easier for people to access. Same thing with writing to your publishers. Let them know that you want books written by humans. And I also have a petition going at the moment, which hopefully will gather some more momentum as we continue talking about this. The number of voices we have is really important on this. If you're a reader who loves reading fiction, sign the petition. The more we have on there, the better we can do with it, and we can present that to the powers that be. And with the election that is happening in Australia, once that's settled, we know who we're going to be targeting with that, and we can tailor it to that as well. So they're just really simple steps that don't cost time or money people to do, and let your authors know how much you love them as well. I didn't put that on my slides, and I probably should, because we are feeling a bit despondent at the moment. So let us know that you love our work and you don't want us replaced by a computer.
Yes, that would be lovely. And there's nothing better than meeting a reader who tells you that they couldn't put your book down, or that they really connected with something you were saying in the book, or it made them cry, or it made them laugh, and or to get an email or something. It There's nothing better. As you said, I think earlier, it's not about the money. It's about
No.
that connection that we make with readers, which is really important, and we want to keep that going.
Yeah, none of us are doing this for the money. We wouldn't do this if it was for the money. We're doing it because of that connection, because we want to explore the human condition and we want to connect with other people around that human condition. So, yeah, let us know that you like what we're doing.
What role do you think publishers have in this? I know that of at least one Australian publisher who has brokered deals using authors' material to train the bots. Others, I'm not sure, have gone down that path as yet. But what role do you think publishers have in being industry leaders really in this, and perhaps helping to be gatekeepers around all this?
Yeah, I think they have to take a more proactive stance in this. As you mentioned, there's definitely one that is doing it already. And at a recent talk at the ASA, they were covering this as one of the things that they want to push for, so that all publishers are doing a similar thing. The current model is flawed because we're playing catch up as publishers, but there is room there to improve that. But I think they absolutely have to take a stand, because at the end of the day, it's actually their jobs on the line as well as ours. If AI can then take all of our work and then reproduce these new novels, I know I use the term loosely if it's written by a computer, the publishing industry will also disappear. So they need to be proactive about it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And look, I have to say, with the different parts of the media that I've worked in my career, publishing is my absolute favourite. I love this industry. I love writers, I love readers, I love publishers. But one thing I noticed coming in from a very different part of the industry, broadcast journalism, is that a lot of the practices in publishing are still from the 18th century. One of my contracts said, dear sir,
Oh, no.
for a feminist book. And so my better nature says, I'm sure publishers will step up and support this legal action and help authors and bind together to push back against what's happening. But it's like a big ship that needs turning around, and they're just taking their time trying to work out what to do. But I'm quite sure they'll come on board.
I know when I went to a publisher's author day last year, obviously publishers are using AI in various ways. So for book design, translations, things like that. I think it's something that authors need to be really aware of when it comes to contracts, and that I'm starting to see that this is creeping into author contracts about the use of their work and AI. What can you add to that discussion?
Yeah, at the recent talk that I went to at the ASA, they covered this as well. And they are formulating some sample clauses that could go into these contracts, for example, because again, as the creator of these works, that's not our area of expertise. We don't know the legalities of all of this, and we don't know how to put that into a contract. So having those advocacy bodies work with the publishing industry to come up with a framework of how these should appear in our contracts is really important. And so for us to then tap into those resources through those advocacy bodies, I think is really important. And, you know, nothing against what you said earlier, Pam, we can't bury our heads in the sand.
I know.
on this. You know, we'll have
mine out.
yeah, we have to. So we have to make ourselves aware of it, so that when we get our next contract and we see those clauses, we understand what they mean. We understand what the ramifications are of those clauses. It will get there. Whether it will get there in time is the thing, because as you said, technology moves so much faster than any regulatory body or government does.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of this is about transparency, isn't it? When we made the cover for my book, Man Made, the graphic designer suggested we use AI to create it because it's an AI book and it starts a conversation. And so at the bottom of the cover, it says this is an AI-generated image. And I know that Kate Mildenhall, the author, talks about this a lot. She used ChatGPT as a particular part of her book, which has got a little bit of a sci-fi futuristic element to it. So it's appropriate with the text, and she's very open about using it for a small part of it. So yes to insertion in the contracts, absolutely, but also yes to this idea of watermarking, which is also in the EU's AI Act.
Okay, great.
Yeah. And that's something that I brought up in my very amateurish way to try to tackle this problem, that it needs to become mandatory, that it is declared whether AI has been used in the production of whether it's a book or a piece of music or a piece of art. And then the power becomes in the consumer's hands as well. When I go to the shops and I'm looking for prawns, for example, I will only buy prawns that I know are from Australia. Yeah. Because I want to support the Australian prawn.
Yeah.
So it's a similar concept to that, the Australian-made concept. If the consumer knows that either the entire work or part of the work has been generated by AI, they can make an informed and educated decision about whether they want to buy into that or not. And at the end of the day, we all know that money talks.
Yeah, for sure. So Tracy, I guess there's two things, because Sandie, you've talked about educating readers. So I think that's really important. And we've touched on some things that we can do as authors and creatives. Anybody that's creating anything and putting it out there, we're putting our intellectual property out there into the world, and we want to know where that's going and who's using it and how. So what do you think, Tracy, that we should be doing, anybody in these industries, what should we be doing to make sure that we're doing as much as we can to help things improve, things to be regulated?
I would say keep on top of what's happening in Australia and overseas when it comes to the different lobby groups and actions to encourage governments to do something, because this area is changing very quickly. The Australian Society of Authors is doing some excellent work lobbying government. Sometimes, as individuals, we feel we have no power, and we forget that in civil society, we live in a democracy. Contact your local member, whether there's an election coming up or not. I've got some friends who are politicians, and they say people very rarely send letters or emails or anything up their electorate office anymore. People forget it's a democracy. And politicians and aspiring politicians want to know what topics are going to get the community engaged, what topics are making their electorate happy or not happy. So contact them to keep it on the agenda.
Yeah, great idea. And Sandie, you mentioned that the ASA they've got a lot of information on their website. They're being really proactive around all this. Is there anything else that you can suggest that authors and creatives do?
I think making sure that we let our readers know what's happening, because obviously the ASA are advocating for us as professionals. And that's one subset of what's going on here. But we need to bring the readers into this, like Tracy said, to contact their MP and to contact the government, because we are a small group of people as creatives, but our readers encompass everybody. And I think I would like to encourage that anybody that works in this sphere reaches out to their newsletter network or their social media network or whatever it is to inform them what's happening, because a lot of the readers don't know what is happening and what it means. And then to encourage them to take up the fight as well. But it has to be done in really easy steps. At the end of the day, everybody's busy. And people don't want to take on yet another cause to fight for when they're already fighting for putting food on the table and those sorts of things. And so when I addressed it, I tried to break it down into really simple steps, actionable, small steps that you can take. So I think as creatives, if we can pass that message on to our readers to get them involved, it then helps, because if there's a sudden flood of these letters, as Tracy said, going to our MPs, and they're the only letters that are coming into our MPs, it's going to put it on their radar.
And that's where collective action is so important. I'm reminded of being at this time in history, we forget that unions still have power. And I know the Media, Entertainment and Arts Alliance has, I think, 4 recommendations on its website at the moment about what should be done to stop the theft of creatives' property. And also, to your point, Sandie, what it means to readers of books, to listeners of music, to people who appreciate art, for example.
I think that was a great example you used earlier, Tracy, about the music industry, because there was so much doom and gloom around that, wasn't there, at the time? And it was quite frightening to think about what could potentially have happened. But the music industry has been a great kind of example, I think, in how people pulling together and really lobbying and standing firm it's been a great outcome. And of course, they're again being dragged into all this again, but I think it shows that you can actually overcome a lot of these problems.
Yeah, one of my favorite expressions is the perfect is the enemy of the good. And I know that if we look back at that Napster time, Spotify took over, and Spotify is not perfect, but at least it pays artists, bands, a percentage of what it makes at the other end. And the Napster model was going to be much worse. So we keep moving forward, we tweak the model, and it's just a matter of trying to get the laws. And really, we're talking about consent and compensation here to keep up with the technology.
Yes, excellent.
And that concept of people banding together comes into what happened with the writers' strike in the US in recent times. It was the writers getting together with the actors, getting together with the crew, and it was a collective approach to it that ended with some quite substantial action taken.
So what would you say to anybody who's out there, say an author, like one of us, thinking, oh, what's the point of me writing another book when, it can just be copied by someone, or someone can just say, write a book in the style of Sandie Docker about blah, 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 and feeling quite kind of despondent. What would you say to them, anyone out there who's listening and feeling that way?
Because this is the very moment in time where we need that more than anything. We need that individual voice, that heart and that soul, because nobody can write a Sandie Docker book except Sandie Docker. I don't care how good AI gets. And so it's more important now more than ever that we embrace our creativity and embrace our individuality. And that's one way of fighting the fight. If we just throw our hands up in the air and give up, they've already won.
Yeah.
So produce that next piece of work and give it your heart and your soul. And in the meantime, in the background, the powers that be will be working and trying to sort out the legal stuff behind the scenes. We need art. And in times of trouble, we need it more than ever. What did we all do during COVID? We turned to music, to reading, to movies. It's where we find our humanity. And if we give up on the humanity, then we've given up altogether.
Yeah, what I would say is all is not lost. Keep writing those wonderful books. To Sandie's point, at this time of polarization, global dislocation, fake news, the rise of strongman leaders, we need heart, humanity, information and education more than ever before. We need our writers. It is a really frightening time in history. We need our fiction writers, because that is the way that people learn empathy and understand humanity. AI will never replicate that. Even though things have expanded exponentially in recent years, there is absolutely no way it will get to the stage where it can write like a human. And again, look at the lessons of history. I know that painting was such a popular art form. And then when photography came out, all the painters, that's it, I might as well hang up the brushes. Photography's come out, that's so realistic. And that's what everyone loves at the moment. I'm going to give up. But that's not true. We live in a society now that embraces photography and painting as different kinds of art. I'm not suggesting that AI is going to be a different art form, but certainly some artists are using it to supplement their work. Some writers are using it to supplement their work, but nothing will supplement the 100% human creative output. That is simply.
Yeah, that's so true, Tracy. And sometimes it takes a crisis to bring people together to actually create that change, doesn't it? It's happened time and time again in history, as you say.
Definitely. We've got to keep moving forward, even if it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back. We've got to look at the long arc of history. As the great Martin Luther King Jr. said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. We are getting there.
I love that. And thank you so much. It's been brilliant.
Well, thanks, Pam. And thank you, Tracy, for agreeing to do this for us.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you both for your writing, your eloquence and your advocacy. Really appreciate it.
Oh,